The emergency alarm screamed through the command center of Outpost Caress. Ambassador Thulnara watched the tactical display with growing horror as another concordant warship exploded into a brief flash of light. The crystalline structure of her body dimmed with despair. In the past 6 months, the Vexthon swarm had destroyed 70% of the Galactic Concord's military forces. Now, they were here at the last defensive line before the core worlds. Ambassador, the flagship Luminous Dawn is retreating, reported Commander Vetathos, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in distress. They've lost primary weapons and life support on decks 4 through 9. The Nara studied the display. Hundreds of bioorganic Vexen ships swarmed through the nebula like insects. Their living vessels absorbed energy weapons and regenerated damage faster than the Concord could inflict it. Every battle was a slow massacre. Every retreat left more dead behind. How long until they reach the station? She asked quietly. 18 minutes, Ambassador. 18 minutes until the Vex then overwhelmed Kara Station. Then nothing would stand between them and the populated worlds. Billions would die. The concordant which had existed for 3,000 years would end. The Nara made her decision. She turned to Vito. Activate the ancient beacon. The commander's crystalline face showed shock. Ambassador, that beacon points to the Death World sector, the restricted zone. Even if the legends about humans are true, we haven't had contact with them in over 400 years. Most scholars believe they destroyed themselves or never existed at all. I know, the Nara said, but we have no other options. Activate it now. Vito hesitated, then nodded. He moved to an ancient control panel in the corner of the command center. The beacon had been installed centuries ago, part of a first contact protocol that was never used. The humans had visited concorded space once long ago, then vanished back into their isolated region of the galaxy. They left behind only the beacon and strict instructions. Use it only in the most desperate circumstances. These were desperate circumstances. The beacon activated with a pulse of energy that rippled through subspace. Thulnara didn't know if anyone would hear it, didn't know if humans still existed, didn't know if they would care. Even if they received the signal, all ships begin evacuation procedures, she ordered. We'll hold as long as we can. The next 15 minutes passed like a nightmare. Concorded ships fired their elegant energy beams at the Vexton swarm, but it was like throwing pebbles at a tsunami. The enemy vessels pushed closer. The station's shields began to fail under concentrated fire. Civilian transports fled toward the jump gate, while military vessels formed a protective screen, dying one by one too. By time for the evacuation, Thulnara watched her people die with quiet dignity. The Concorded had always fought with honor, with careful strategy and measured responses. They had never encountered an enemy like the Vexthan, who fought with endless numbers and savage brutality. Ambassador, jump signature detected. Vito suddenly shouted, something's coming out of faster than light travel. It's massive. On the tactical display, a single contact appeared, then space itself seemed to tear open and something emerged that made every sensor on the station scream warnings. The ship was enormous, larger than any concordant vessel. Its hull was dark gray metal, covered in angular armor plates and studded with weapons batteries. It looked heavy, brutal, and aggressive. Nothing like the elegant curves and energy-efficient designs of Concorded ships. Getting identification, Vito reported, his voice shaking. It's broadcasting in an old dialect. The translation reads Terran Colonial Navy. Ship Indomitable, Dreadnought class. Captain Maria Chen commanding Tan. Belnaro whispered. Human, the Indomitable didn't slow down or request permission. It simply accelerated directly toward the Vexton fleet at a speed that should have been impossible for something so large. Weapon ports along its hull began to glow. They're charging weapons, V said. Energy signatures are, Ambassador. Those aren't energy weapons, those are kinetic accelerators and missile tubes. Hundreds of them. A communication channel opened. The voice that came through was female, speaking in clear, Concorded standard language with a strange accent. Concorded forces, this is Captain Chen of the TCNS Indomitable. We received your distress call. Recommend you pull back to a safe distance. We're going in hot. The Nara found her voice. Captain Chen, the enemy numbers over 300 vessels. You're alone. There was a pause, then the human captain replied, and Thilnara could hear something in her voice, not fear. Something else, something fierce. We're never alone, Ambassador, and 300 isn't that many. Indomitable to all hands. Battle stations, let's show these bugs what happens when you mess with our neighbors. The human warship Dove straight into the heart of the Vex, then swarm, and the battle began in earnest. Thilnara watched in stunned silence as the Indomitable opened fire with every weapon it had. This was nothing like concordant warfare. This was something primal and terrifying. This was humanity. The first salvo from the Indomitable lit up space like a newborn star. Rail guns along the ship's spine fired solid metal slugs at a significant fraction of light speed. Each projectile carried enough kinetic energy to punch clean through a Vexen bioship. The rounds didn't need to be aimed perfectly. At those velocities, even a glancing hit was devastating. 6 Vexton vessels exploded in the first 3 seconds. On Kara Station, every Concorded officer stared at their displays in disbelief. Commander Vito checked his readings 3 times, convinced there was an error. There wasn't. The human ship is accelerating into the enemy formation, he reported, his voice barely above a whisper. They're not slowing down. They're speeding up. Ambassador Thilnara watched as the Indomitable charged forward like a predator. Vexen ship swarmed around it, their bioorganic weapons firing acidic projectiles and energy-draining beams. The human vessel's shields flared under the assault, then failed completely. The Concorded had lost ships within seconds of shield failure. The Indomitable kept fighting, armor plating scarred and burned under Vexton weapons, but the human ship had layers upon layers of redundant protection. What would have killed a Concorded vessel only wounded the human dreadnought, and while it took damage, it dealt death in return. Missile pods opened along the ship's flanks, hundreds of missiles launched in a single overwhelming wave. They didn't move in the careful, predictable patterns of Concorded ordnance. These missiles jinxed and weaved using small thrusters to dodge return fire. Some carried explosive warheads, others were kinetic kill vehicles that simply rammed targets at incredible speed. A few released clouds of micromunitions that shredded Vexton biohips like a swarm of metal insects. What kind of warfare is This, Vito asked, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. Captain. Chen's voice came over the communication channel again. Concorded ships recommend you target the enemy vessels on the outer edge of the formation. We're going to drive straight through the middle and break their cohesion. Captain, your shields are down, Vilnara responded. You're taking significant damage. We've noticed, Chen replied calmly. There was an explosion in the background of the transmission. Damage control teams are on it. We've got plenty of fight left in us. The Indomitable proved her captain right. Its point defense systems activated as Vexthon fighters swarmed closer. Dozens of rapid-fire cannons tracked targets with computer precision. They fired thousands of rounds per second, creating a wall of metal that shredded anything that came close. Vexthon fighters that had terrorized concordant forces for months died and drove the human ship reach the center of the enemy formation and did something that made Vilnara's crystalline structure pulse with shock. It rotated 90 degrees and fired a broadside from weapons that hadn't been visible before. Massive cannons that looked primitive but terrifyingly effective unleashed shells the size of ground vehicles. Each impact sent shock waves through the Vexthon swarm. They're using chemical propellants, Vito said, studying the sensor data. Explosives to launch physical projectiles. That technology is thousands of years old, but it works. Thnr observed. It did work. The Vexthon had evolved to absorb and adapt to energy weapons. They had never encountered an enemy that simply threw heavy objects at relativistic speeds. Their regeneration couldn't heal from having massive holes punched through their organic hulls. The Indomitable took more damage. A Vexthon acid weapon melted through an armor section, exposing several decks to vacuum. Vilnara expected the ship to retreat or at least slow its assault. Instead, automated bulkheads sealed off the damaged sections. She could see small figures in spacesuits moving through the exposed areas, working to patch the breach. Even as the battle raged around them, their crew is conducting repairs during combat, Bethos said in amazement. They're working in vacuum with enemy fire all around them. Captain Chen's tactical approach became clear as the battle continued. She wasn't trying to destroy the entire Vexthon fleet. She was creating chaos, breaking their formations, forcing them to focus on her ship instead of the evacuation. Every minute the Indomitable held their attention was another minute for concorded civilians to escape. Concorded military vessels, inspired by the human ship's ferocity, rallied for one final push. They coordinated with the Indomitable, targeting enemies that Chen's weapons couldn't immediately reach. For the first time in months, the Vexthon advance stopped. Then it began to reverse. The Vexthon, operating on hive mind instincts, realized they faced something new, something dangerous. They had overwhelmed dozens of species, but they had never encountered something that fought like this, something that refused to break, no matter how much damage it took. The swarm began to pull back, regrouping for a more organized assault. Captain Chen didn't give them the chance. She ordered her ship to pursue, firing continuously, giving the Vexthon no time to recover. All civilian transports are through the jump gate, Vito reported. The evacuation is complete, Captain Chen. All civilians are safe. Thera transmitted. You've Done enough, please withdraw before you take more damage. Negative, Ambassador. Chen replied, we're going to make sure these bugs don't follow you. Indomitable. The Concorded fleet jumped to safety. We'll cover your retreat, Elnara wanted to argue, but she knew the human was right. The Concorded ships were nearly destroyed. Only the Indomitable had the strength to hold the line. Thank you, Captain, she said quietly. We owe you a debt we can never repay. Just doing our job, Ambassador. See you on the other side. The Concorded ships jumped away. The Indomitable remained behind, alone, against 300 enemies, buying time with blood and steel, an unbreakable human determination. The Indomitable jumped into Concorded space 3 hours after the battle. Captain Chen brought her ship alongside the refugee fleet's command vessel, converted merchant carrier that now served as Ambassador Thulnara's temporary headquarters. The human dreadnought looked like it had been through hell. Armor was scorched and melted. Entire sections were exposed to vacuum. Debris still clung to parts of the hull, but it was moving under its own power, and its weapons were still operational. Thulnara stood in the docking bay as the human captain came aboard with a small security detail. This was the first time the Conquered had seen humans in over 400 years. The Ambassador wanted to make a good impression, though she wasn't sure what that meant for a species from a death world. The airlock opened. Captain Maria Chen stepped through, and Thulnara immediately understood why the humans were so dangerous. Chen was short by Concorded standards, barely reaching Thulnara's shoulder, but she moved with confidence and power. Her body was compact and muscular, built for strength rather than elegance. She wore a dark blue uniform with various insignia and a sidearm on her hip. Her brown skin showed scars and her dark eyes missed nothing as she scanned the docking bay. Behind her came 4 more humans, all armed and alert. They moved with predatory grace, their eyes constantly checking for threats. They were warriors, and they made no attempt to hide it. Ambassador Thulnara, Chen said, extending her hand in the human greeting. It's an honor to meet you. Thulnara carefully touched the human's hand, mimicking the gesture she'd seen in old records. Chen's skin was warm, and her grip was strong enough to be slightly uncomfortable. Captain Chen, you saved thousands of lives today. The honor is ours. Chen smiled slightly. We received your distress call and came as fast as we could. I'm sorry we didn't arrive sooner. You arrived exactly when we needed you, Thulnara said. She gestured toward the conference room. Please, we have much to discuss. As they walked, Thulnara noticed how the humans studied everything. They didn't just look, they assessed, calculated, identified threats and exits. It was both unsettling and impressive. In the conference room, Concorded officials gathered around the table. They stared at the humans with barely concealed fascination and fear. Chen's security detail positioned themselves near the exits, not threateningly but with clear tactical awareness. I need to know what we're dealing with, Chen said once everyone was seated. Tell me about the Vexton. Commander Vito activated a holographic display. The Vexen are a hivemind species. They consume entire worlds to fuel their reproduction. They appeared in our space 6 months ago from unknown regions. Since then they've destroyed 70% of our military forces and occupied 14 systems. Hivemind Chen Repeated, making notes on a small device, so taking out leadership. Structures won't work, what about their reproduction rate? Extremely high. They breed new ships in weeks rather than months. Our intelligence suggests they have multiple breeding worlds in occupied territory. Chen nodded. We'll need to hit those. What about their tactics? They overwhelm with numbers. Their biohips can regenerate damage from energy weapons. We noticed, Chen said dryly. Good thing we don't rely on energy weapons. Volnara hesitated, then asked the question everyone wanted. Answered, Captain, why do your weapons seem so primitive? Chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles were abandoned by most species millennia ago. Chen leaned back in her chair. Because they work. Energy weapons are elegant, sure, but they require massive power generation, long recharge times, and they're vulnerable to certain defenses. A chunk of metal traveling at 8 light speed doesn't care about shields or armor, it just hits and keeps hitting. Plus, if our power systems fail, our guns still work, but the damage your ship took, Vito said. You lost shields immediately and continued fighting with exposed decks. Any concorded vessel would have been destroyed. Chen smiled again, and there was something fierce in that expression. Our ships are built to take damage and keep fighting. We have redundant systems for our redundant systems, armor plating meters thick, damage control teams trained to work in the worst conditions. We design our ships assuming they'll get hurt, so when they do, we're ready. Why? Delara asked. Why build for such brutal warfare? The human captain's smile faded. Because humans spent thousands of years fighting each other. We had 2 world wars that killed millions. We developed nuclear weapons that could destroy entire planets. We learned warfare in the hardest way possible. Then we went to space and decided nobody else would ever threaten us again. The room fell silent. The concorded species had never fought among themselves. They had evolved on gentle worlds, developed space travel through cooperation, and encountered other peaceful species. The concept of fighting your own kind was almost incomprehensible. Earth is a high-gravity death world. Chen continued. Everything there evolved to survive. Our ancestors fought predators, disease, each other. We're an LT, Unk, and GT. Stubborn because the weak didn't survive. We're aggressive because passivity meant death. We're tough because our planet made us that way. And now you bring that experience to help us, Thilnara said quietly. Yes, Chen confirmed. We received your beacon and came immediately. The Terran Colonial Navy doesn't ignore distress calls. More ships are coming. My fleet admiral will be here in 2 days with additional forces. Why help us? Veed asked. We haven't had contact with humanity in centuries. Chen looked at each concorded officer in turn. Because it's the right thing to do. Because we remember what it's like to face extinction. Because no one should have to fight alone. She paused. And because if we don't stop the Vex, then here eventually they'll reach human space. Better to fight them now on your front alongside allies. Vilnara felt something shift in her understanding. These humans were warriors. Yes, they were dangerous and violent and frightening, but they were also honorable. They fought not just for themselves but for others. How badly damaged is your ship? She asked. We'll be ready for another fight in about 30 hours, Chen said. My crew is already working on repairs. 30 hours, Bethto said in shock. That level of damage Would take us weeks to repair. Chen stood and gestured toward the window, where the Indomitable hung in space. Take a closer look if you want. Watch my crew work. Maybe you'll learn something. Over the next day, Concorded engineers observed the human repair efforts with growing amazement. Human crew members worked in shifts, never stopping moving. With coordinated efficiency, they welded armor plates, replaced damaged systems, and cleared debris with tireless determination. Small robots assisted them, but most of the work was done by hand. The humans didn't give up. They didn't slow down. They simply worked until the job was finished. Telnar watched them and realized the Concorded had found more than military allies. They had found teachers who could show them what it meant to truly fight for survival. The Bastion of Kai was the last major military installation before the Concord's core world. Its massive space station and defensive fleet represented the final organized resistance against the Vexton advance. When the Indomitable arrived with the refugee fleet, the station's defenders were preparing for a siege. They knew they couldn't win. That changed when Fleet Admiral Marcus Webb arrived with 7 more human warships. Ambassador Telnero watched from the station's observation deck as the human fleet took up positions. There were 2 more dreadnoughts like the Indomitable, 4 heavy cruisers and 3 destroyers. Compared to the hundreds of Vexen vessels pressing toward them, it seemed like nothing. But Thulnara had learned not to underestimate humans. Admiral Webb was older than Captain Chen, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of command. He carried himself with quiet authority as he addressed the combined Concordant and human leadership in the station's war room. We're not here to defend the station, Webb announced, and the holographic display behind him shifted to show deep space territory held by the Vexton. We're going to attack. The Concorded commanders erupted in protest. General Kermoth, the highest-ranking military officer, spoke for all of them. Admiral, that's suicide. The Vexen control 14 systems. They have breeding worlds, producing new ships constantly. We don't have the forces to assault occupied territory. You don't have the forces to defend either, Webb replied bluntly. So we changed the game. Our intelligence drones have identified 3 major Vexen breeding worlds. These facilities produce the biohips you've been fighting. If we destroy them, we cut off their reinforcements. The breeding worlds are deep in occupied space, Commander Vito said, studying the display surrounded by defensive fleets. Any assault would be detected immediately. That's why we're not sending our whole fleet, Webb said. We'll use hit-and-run tactics, fast strikes with overwhelming firepower, then jump out before they can respond effectively. Captain Chen stepped forward, pointing to one of the breeding worlds. My ship and the Unbreakable will hit this target. The cruisers will take the second world. Admiral Webb will command the 3rd strike personally. And what about the Vexton fleets currently advancing on the station? General Kermoth asked. The Concorded fleet will harass and delay them here, Webb said. You don't have to win, just keep them busy while we cut their supply lines. Thulnara studied the human admiral's plan. It was aggressive, risky, and completely unlike anything the Concordant would have attempted. It also might be their only chance. If we fail, the core worlds will be defenseless, she said quietly. If we do nothing, they're already dead, Webb replied. At least This way, we're taking the fight to the enemy. The first strike launched 6 hours later. Captain Chen's task force jumped into the system containing a Vexen breeding world. The world itself was a nightmare, its surface covered in organic structures that pulsed and grew. Like tumors, ships were birthed from massive organic pods and launched into space. The indomitable and unbreakable didn't waste time. They entered maximum weapons range and opened fire with everything they had. Missiles by the hundreds streaked toward the surface. Rail gun slugs turned portions of the breeding structures into craters. Nuclear warheads detonated in carefully calculated patterns to maximize destruction. The Vex and defensive fleet responded immediately, but they were too slow. By the time they engaged, the human ships had already done massive damage. Chen ordered her ships to fight a running battle, destroying defenders. While moving toward the jump point, we need ground teams to ensure complete destruction. Chen reported to Admiral Webb. The breeding structures go deep underground. Approved. Webb responded. Deploy Marines. Vilnara monitoring from Kyre Station watched as small craft launched from the human dreadnoughts. They carried soldiers in powered armor that made them look like small vehicles. Marines hit the surface and immediately began their assault. Concorded sensors tracked the humans as they moved through the breeding structures. What they saw shocked them. The Marines fought with coordinated brutality, using weapons that seemed designed specifically to cause maximum damage. They carried rifles that fired explosive rounds, launchers that sent rockets into organic structures, and close combat weapons that cut through Vexthon defenders like paper. They're not just soldiers, Vito said. In awe, they're specialized warriors. The Marines planted charges throughout the breeding structures, working with efficiency born from extensive training. When Vexthon reinforcements arrived, the humans formed defensive positions and held them with stubborn determination. They didn't retreat. They didn't panic. They simply fought until their mission was complete. Charges set, reported the Marine commander, a woman named Lieutenant Ock, requesting extraction. Negative, Captain Chen responded. Vexthon fleet is between you and the extraction point. Can you reach the secondary site? We and LT Unk and GT LL make it happen, Captain, Okoya replied calmly. The Marines fought their way across 5 km of hostile territory, carrying wounded comrades and never leaving anyone behind. By the time they reached the extraction point, they had lost 3 soldiers but completed their mission. The human ships jumped away just as the charges detonated. The breeding world's surface erupted in a chain reaction that destroyed decades of Vexen infrastructure. Similar strikes hit the other 2 breeding worlds over the next 4 days. The Concorded fleet at Kyre Station held the line through continuous skirmishing, using hit-and-run tactics taught by human advisors. They learned to think like humans, to be aggressive instead of defensive, to take risks instead of playing it safe. The Vex then advanced slowed as their reinforcements dried up. Suddenly the endless swarms weren't so endless anymore. Admiral Webb called a meeting of all commanders after the 3rd successful strike. The mood was cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. The Vexten are hurting, Webb said, but they're not broken. Intelligence indicates they're pulling all remaining forces back to defend their prime nest. It's a moon-sized structure in the Vera system. That's where their central hive mind resides. You want to attack it, Delnara said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Webb confirmed. We end this war by cutting off the head. The prime nest controls and coordinates. All Vexthan forces destroy it and they'll scatter. It will be the most heavily defended target in the galaxy. General Kermoff said, probably Webb. Agreed, but we're not going to get a better opportunity there. Consolidating their forces, which means they're no longer spread across 14 systems. We hit them now all at once. With everything we have, Captain Chen looked at the tactical display, studying the prime nest's defenses. It's going to be bloody. Yes, Admiral Webb said. Quietly but necessary. This is what we came here to do. Delara looked around the room at humans and concorded officers standing together. A month ago, her people had been on the edge of extinction. Now they were planning an offensive strike against an enemy that had seemed invincible. Humans had given them more than military support. They had given them hope. They had shown them that fighting back was possible, that determination and courage could overcome impossible odds. When do we launch? She asked. Admiral Webb smiled. Tomorrow. We end this war tomorrow. The combined fleet jumped into the Varus system in a coordinated wave that stretched across millions of km. Human dreadnoughts formed the spearhead, flanked by concorded capital ships. Behind them came cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels. It was the largest military operation in concorded history. The Vexton Prime Nest dominated the system. It was truly moon-sized, a grotesque organic structure that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Thousands of ships surrounded it, and the sensors detected weapon systems that could vaporize entire fleets. All ships weapons-free, Admiral Webb ordered. Hit them with everything. The battle began with a storm of fire that lit up the darkness of space. Human missiles crossed the distance in seconds, their warheads detonating against Vexthon. Shields, railgun slugs followed, punching through shields weakened by the initial barrage. Concordat energy weapons added their power to the assault, their beams carving through enemy vessels. The Vexthon responded with their own fury. Bioorganic ships swarmed forward in waves. Acid weapons and energy drains focused on the human ships, knowing they were the greatest threat. The defenders fought with desperate determination, protecting their hive mind at all costs. Captain Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical display with focused intensity. Her ship shook as enemy fire impacted the armor. Damage reports streamed in, but she ignored them for now. Her crew knew their jobs. All power to forward weapons, she ordered. We're going straight in. The Indomitable and her sister ship Unbreakable accelerated directly toward the prime nest. It was the same tactic Chen had used at Karas Station, diving into the heart of enemy formations to create chaos. Behind them, the rest of the fleet engaged the Vexen defenders, preventing them from focusing all their fire on the two dreadnoughts. Captain, we're taking heavy damage. Her executive officer reported. Port armor is at 40%. We've lost missiles tube 6 through 12. Keep firing, Chen replied. All we need is to get close enough. Ambassador Thelner watched from the command ship Eternal Light, safe in the second wave. She had argued to be closer to the fighting, but Admiral Webb had refused. Someone needed to survive to tell the story. If this failed, she Watch the tactical display as the Indomitable punched through the Vexthon lines. The human ship was bleeding. Atmosphere from multiple breaches. Trailing debris, shields flickering and failing, but its weapons never stopped. Firing. Every second, it killed another enemy ship. The Unbreakable followed. Close behind, its captain coordinating perfectly with Chen. The two ships fought like they were extensions of each other, covering weaknesses and exploiting openings. They're going to reach the nest, Commander Vito said in amazement. They're actually going to make it. Both dreadnoughts broke through the final defensive line and entered weapons range of the prime nest itself. The organic structure's weapons activated massive biocannons that could destroy capital ships with single shots. The Unbreakable took a direct hit that vaporized its entire forward section. The ship died in seconds, taking 800 crew members with it. Chen's voice came over the fleet channel, steady despite the loss. Indomitable to all ships. We're going to finish this. Cover our insertion. Insertion, Nara asked. What is she planning? She got her answer moments later. The Indomitable didn't fire on the nest from distance. Instead, Chen drove her ship directly toward the organic structure surface, using her remaining point defense weapons to clear a path. The ship's armored prow smashed into the nest, and the dreadnought came to a shuddering halt, half buried in organic matter. Captain Chen, what are you doing? Admiral Webb demanded. The nest's outer shell is too thick for our weapons to penetrate from outside, Chen explained. We're going in, preparing to deploy ground teams with nuclear charges. You'll never make it out, Webb said quietly. I know, Chen replied, but we'll make sure this thing dies. Indomitable to Marine detachment, deploy immediately. Nara watched as armored Marines exited the embedded dreadnought and moved into the nest's interior. They carried portable nuclear devices powerful enough to crack the moon-sized structure from within. Captain Chen led the team personally, leaving her bridge crew to keep the ship's weapons firing. Externally, the Marines fought through organic corridors filled with Vexen defenders. Their powered armor and heavy weapons gave them an advantage in close quarters. They pushed deeper into the nest, following scanner readings toward the central hive mind chamber. Nara listened to the calm chatter, hearing the Marines call out positions and targets. They sounded calm, professional, even as they fought through impossible odds. She heard the names of Marines who fell, continuing to fight until their last breath. Captain Chen's team reached the central chamber 40 minutes after insertion. It was massive, filled with pulsing organic structures that glowed with sickly light. At the center was something that might have been a brain, a collection of neural tissue the size of a building. Charges set, Chen reported. Detonation in 5 minutes. All teams fall back to extraction point, but the Vex then had closed the path behind them. The Marines found themselves surrounded, cut off from the Indomitable. The Vex then threw everything they had at the human warriors, desperate to stop the detonation. We're pinned down, Chen reported, her voice tight. Can't reach extraction. Admiral Webb made the hardest decision of his career. Captain, detonate now, don't wait. Negative, Admiral, my Marines aren't clear. That's an order, Captain. There was silence on the channel. Then Chen spoke again, her voice firm. With respect, Admiral, go to hell. We don't leave people behind. The fleet continued It's battle outside, desperately trying to break through to rescue Chen's team. But the Vex then defenses were too strong. Time ticked down toward the detonation. Then a new voice came over the channel, indomitable crew to Captain Chen, we're coming to get you. On the tactical display, the Lunara watched as the badly damaged dreadnought tore itself free from the nest's surface. The ship was dying, its power systems failing, but its crew refused to abandon their captain. They flew the crippled vessel deeper into the nest, using its bulk as a battering ram. The Indomitable crashed through organic corridors, its armor tearing away, its structure failing, but it reached Chen's position. Emergency airlocks opened and the Marines scrambled aboard. All personnel recovered, Chen reported. Get us out of here. The Indomitable tried to escape, but its engines were gone. The ship was dead in space, trapped deep inside the nest. The nuclear charges would detonate in less than a minute. This is Admiral Webb to all ships. Emergency jump to the following coordinates. We need to be far away when those charges blow. The fleet began jumping out of the system, but the Lunara couldn't look away from the display showing the Indomitable, its crew fighting to restart engines that would never work again. Then something unexpected happened. A dozen Concorded heavy cruisers broke formation and jumped to positions around the human dreadnought. They extended tractor beams, grabbing onto the dying ship. Concorded vessels, what are you doing? Admiral Webb demanded. General Kermoth's voice answered, what humans taught us. Admiral, nobody fights alone. The Concorded ships working together dragged the Indomitable out of the nest. They jumped away just as the nuclear charges detonated. The explosion tore through the prime nest from within. The structure broke apart in a chain reaction visible across the entire system. The Vexton hive mind died in. With it, the coordination that made the swarm so deadly. Vexton ships across the battlefield stopped their organized assault. Without central control, they scattered, fleeing in random directions. Some fought on independently, but without coordination, they were easily defeated. The war ended not with a final battle, but with the enemy simply breaking apart and running back at Kai Station. 3 days later, Captain Chen stood beside Ambassador the Lunara, watching repair crews work on the Indomitable. The ship would fly again eventually, but it needed months of repairs. You were willing to sacrifice yourself, the Lunara said quietly. You and your entire crew. It was necessary, Chen replied simply. But your crew refused to leave you, and my people refused to let your crew die. Chen smiled. That's what it means to be allies, to stand together even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The Lunara's crystalline structure glowed with emotion. You've given us more than victory, Captain. You've shown us what true strength looks like, not just weapons and armor, but determination, courage, the refusal to give up on each other. You had that strength all along, Chen said. You just needed someone to remind you. Admiral Webb approached, datapad in hand. Captain, I have new orders from Earth. The Terran Colonial Navy is establishing a permanent base in Concorded space. We're going to help you rebuild your fleets and train your personnel, and we will teach you our knowledge in return. Delara said, a true alliance between our peoples. Chen looked out at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened since receiving that desperate distress call. No one fights alone, she said quietly. That's the lesson here. Together we're stronger than any threat, Vilnara placed her hand on the human captain's shoulder, mimicking the gesture of support she had seen humans use. Together, she agreed, always together. The war was over. The alliance had just begun.